Welcome. Today is May 16th, 2 p.m. We're glad to gavel in the Education Conference Committee. And I think we should let the record reflect that both chairs believe we should be holding this in a different venue today. Quite frankly, I think the Capitol lawn would be a quite beautiful spot today. I don't think it's raining yet, but we're glad.
So moved.
Yeah, I see Senator Weber is making that motion.
I
Senator Weber.
assume, Madam Chair, you probably don't dare take a vote on that right now, right?
True. We will stay in place, but our hearts may be out in the sunshine. So, members, before us today, the Senate has brought forth, again, looking at the parameters that we looked at were things that are in both the House bill and the Senate bill in some form, and that don't have dollars attached to them. Until we get those joint budget targets, we won't be addressing that. However, we do have some items where both bodies addressed these items, and there was a little bit of difference in how we addressed them. And so what I think might be helpful is if right to the left of your page, if you were to number that first row 1, and the page is R8A2, that's original row number 65. That's your first item there. If you would put a 1 by that item, and then the one underneath it, which is original row number 68, put a 2. And then original row number 143, put a 1. Just want to make sure nobody zipped ahead there. And then again, under the row underneath that, original number 182, please place a number 2. The row underneath that, row number 205, please mark that with a 3. The next two, which are rows 256 and 264, please mark each of those with a 4. And then the final row 293 was the original number. Please mark that with a 5. That might help us as we go forward on our discussion about these items. So what the Senate has proposed here are, we'll kind of take them one by one as we've done in the past, so members have ample opportunity to discuss or ask questions. And then we'll be moving each number as a package. So number 1 would be moved as a package, number 2 as a package, number 3 and 4 and 5. So, Mr. Chair, yes, and we'll obviously take a recess to discuss. You can discuss those with your members, but that would be the intent after you've had that ability to do so. So the first motion, members, would be items 1 on your sheet. And I'll have Mr. Arneson briefly describe those, and also where they are so you can find the language, the exact language in your side-by-side.
Madam Chair, the first set of items that you have marked 1 spans 2 articles. The first is in Article 2 on page R8A2. This is the House provision in Section 8 relating to screening students in early elementary grades for dyslexia. And with the Senate proposal here, there's an A53 amendment. And maybe just for the benefit of those who don't have the amendment in front of them, in the House language at page 44, lines 22 and 25, after screened, insert, comma, in a locally determined manner, comma.
And so this amendment would be, my original amendment would be amended with this amendment as well. We wanted to make sure that we addressed any potential concerns that had been brought up in committee. And this language has not had any opposition.
And Madam Chair, the second item in that first pair is in Article 3 on page R8 of Article 3. It's Senate Section 4. This is the Senate proposal relating to teacher preparation programs. And instruction in those programs on dyslexia. So both of these provisions deal with dyslexia intervention strategies and/or training.
And I believe we have the A57 amendment.
No, Madam.
Oh, that's on the
Yep,
next one,
yep.
excuse me.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Chair
Could-
Davnie.
Could I just ask Ms. Para to walk through the House language and the differences between the House and the Senate?
Yes.
Ms. Para, if you would? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Mr. Chair, yes. So we're on page R8. You're saying the House Section 14 versus the Senate Section 4?
That's correct.
Mr. Chair, members, the House version of this language, it's a technical change proposed by Pelsby, moving away from referring to providers as college and universities and changing it to preparation providers. So the House makes only a technical change there on line 110.3.
But I don't know then if it's appropriate to ask Mr. Arneson to compare, contrast.
Ms. Butler.
Butler, excuse me. Thank you.
And then, Mr. Chair and members, the Senate language has the similar language as the House file about the teacher preparation providers. But then the Senate file goes on to, in paragraph B, amend the language for the type of instruction that teachers of elementary education are supposed to receive in the preparation programs regarding it would be evidence-based and structured reading instruction programs. And then paragraph C changes the requirements for teacher prep programs for the teachers in elementary ed, early childhood, and special education and reading intervention to include instruction on dyslexia. And if I could note, Madam Chair, members, the effective date for the Senate section actually needs to be changed to clarify that only paragraph C is effective in June 1, 2020, not the entire section.
Thank you. We'll need a oral amendment for that. Any further discussion on the pairing? Yes.
Representative Sandstede.
Representative Sandstede.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And maybe to both of the chairs, would you prefer to just do your walkthrough on these sections first and then take questions, or flesh out questions as they come up?
Yep, I think it would be helpful to take the question, to have the brief walkthrough about what the proposal looks like, and then as we get that from our staff, I think answering those questions, speaking to that, I think is important at that time.
Okay.
And then we'll recess so you can speak with the conferees about that.
Okay. I do have a question then.
Ms. Sandstede.
Thank you very much. In the Senate provision that we just looked at, and I'm looking at specifically 63.14, you have evidence-based. Is there anything in statute that defines evidence-based, or what do you mean by that? I know, having gone through my master's program and having it be an evidence-based program, I know what it means in that context, but in the context of this, I think it might be helpful.
So thank you for the question. So, we understand that, well, I would just give you the most important aspect is that, as we've talked about before, the Senate focuses on students and funds what works. And so evidence-based, in my mind, in any other arena, is you have evidence that what you're doing has a specific result. But there is a little bit more historically to that, the difference between scientific-based and evidence-based, and I believe that Ms. Butler has some of that history. And while she's looking that up, also you might recall this was a House offer, and the only thing that we've done differently is to add the, well, we will add the A57 amendment about local control. So it was a previous offer. The other thing that you might want to know is that this was a Senator Clausen proposal in the Minnesota Senate. And again, we are, quite frankly, what we've been doing for the last good number of years has not been working when it comes to early literacy particularly. And what we have been doing regarding students who have dyslexia, we've seen great results in certain types of instruction for all reading, but particularly for about 20% of our students, those who have dyslexia. So if we want to keep getting the same results that we've always had, which is a good number of our students are not reading proficiently, then we know we'll keep doing what we're doing. But as you've noticed in the Senate proposal, we have done a number of pieces of the Senate bill really focus on early literacy, that evidence-based reading, what works, and this is just one of those provisions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And then just to clarify, I think it would be helpful, is there an absolute that we're measuring this against? Is there like an ERIC database that we are determining what programs are evidence-based or not evidence-based? What's the absolute measurement that everybody in the state can go to and say, this program is or isn't an evidence-based program?
And you're speaking to the teacher prep piece of this, I assume.
I'm speaking to the evidence-based, how you have it defined here in your language.
As far as the teacher preparation programs,
Yes.
determining, using evidence-based reading practices. Yes, yes. Ms. Butler.
Madam Chair, members, in the 2017 bill, when the position of the dyslexia specialist was required at the department, in 120B.122, under the requirements, the dyslexia specialist has to be highly trained in dyslexia and related disorders, as well as and in using intervention and treatments that are evidence-based, multisensory, direct, explicit, structured, and sequential in the areas of phonics, phonemic awareness, vocabulary, fluency, and comprehension. So we didn't define what evidence-based is, but it's part of the requirements that go along with what the dyslexia specialist training is.
Yes, yes, yes. As we thought, it's evidence-based in ESSA. So that's defined in ESSA.
And then, Madam Chair, would we need, or would it be helpful to have a cross-reference at this point in statute to the statute that you just referenced?
And so Ms. Snyder has texted us about that it's based upon not the journal, not journalistic proven in journals, but looking that it, in the Every Student Succeeds Act, is looking towards evidence-based, those programs or interventions or preparations that we have evidence that work.
Thank you.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Looking at the language on 63.15 on the Senate side, and the totality of paragraph B there, am I right that your intent is to prohibit teacher preparation programs from teaching any literacy approach other than a structured approach, even if those other approaches may be evidence-based? Because as I see it, this dramatically narrows and limits the, freedom of teachers, of instructors in these programs.
Chair Davnie, the language doesn't say that. The language is pretty clear that programs for teachers of elementary education must require instruction in evidence-based reading. That doesn't mean that there is no other type of instruction. So when we require something, we don't usually throw everything else out. We require that the preparation include this particular provision.
It just was getting to your intent, so having that on the record that respecting that there may be other evidence-based approaches that would still be available for teacher preparation programs to instruct elementary candidates in is helpful.
Well, I would hope that no teacher prep would be using reading instruction that is not evidence-based. So I don't see that this is eliminating anything except perhaps preparation programs that aren't training teachers to teach reading.
Well, but with that clarification, I don't think it does either. Thank you.
Chair Youakim.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just one quick question too, and I understand, and I agree that we should also be teaching evidence-based programs. I do worry, however, about striking out the scientifically based and wondered if you'd entertain when we take a break of having scientifically based or evidence-based, because if you look at Section 1 in current law, it cites 122A.06 subdivision 4, which is the definition for scientifically based. So I worry that they'd be in conflict, that those two sections would be in conflict with each other, because you're taking out the scientifically based on line 63.14, saying that it only should be evidence-based. So I think it would read and give a little more flexibility and local control to our teachers that are teaching reading to have scientifically based or evidence-based, since the definition for scientifically based is in the underlying statute on line 63.17, the 122A.06 subdivision 4.
So, Madam Chair, just a couple things. One, I believe that's fine to have both of those there. Again, the key is that our teachers in their teacher prep are getting those, their reading instruction that they will be very fluent in evidence-based reading and scientifically based reading. I do not sense that there is a conflict there. I do want to just be clear that ESSA actually uses the language evidence-based reading. So as we look at ESSA, and it talks about evidence-based practices, evidence-based reading. And of course, these are, what we're looking at here is PELSB approving those teacher prep programs. And so that those teacher prep programs must include evidence-based and structured reading, and a structured reading program. And so if you would like to make a oral amendment to retain scientifically based, we'd certainly entertain that. And I would see that as a friendly amendment.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Did you mean now or later?
No, I think we're going to take all the,
Okay,
all the action after you've had a chance to go over these steps with your conferees.
there was a pregnant pause there.
Thank you.
All right. So I don't see any other questions or comments on original row 65 and 143. So then we will move to the second row on your paper, which is original row 68. That has to do with statewide testing. Basically requiring the commissioner to establish a testing period as late as possible so our students get as much instruction as possible before that testing. But I'll have Mr. Arneson, if you want to speak to that and get us on the right page in the side-by-side.
Madam Chair, the provision you're speaking of is on begins on R10, or in Article
A2.
In Article 2. It's Senate Section 5. And I believe part of what you're proposing includes an A57 amendment, which I don't believe the members have yet.
Oh, the A57 amendment is coming your way.
So in summary, Madam Chair, the Senate provision, again, as you said, requires the commissioner to establish a MCA testing period as late as possible. It strikes some obsolete language. And then the last bit on page R14 actually is the same in both bodies, except after some feedback from the agency, Senate's proposing in the A57 amendment to reinstate the stricken language at Senate page 33, line 31. And I should clarify, the paragraph R on the House side is obviously not present in the Senate language.
And Mr. Arneson, just to reiterate, the reinsertion of computer adaptive assessments was at the request of the department.
Yes, Madam Chair, I think both the House and Senate perhaps got a little greedy in the striking there relative to the rest of the House and Senate proposals.
And I believe both, this language on both sides was in response to a OLA report as well. Any, Mr. Arneson?
Madam Chair, would you like me to explain the companion provision
Yes.
to that? Okay, so the paired provision in the Senate proposal would be, again, in Article 3 on page R30. And this would be the last remaining unadopted provision related to the American Indian teacher training scholarships. And so the Senate, in this proposal, proposes to adopt on page R30A3, House Section 49.
Madam Chair.
Chair Youakim.
Thank you. I'm getting a little confused because I actually paired up with that on Senate Article 2, Section 5. It's actually House Article 2, Section 9 on R1042? Or am I in the wrong?
R30.
Madam Chair, yeah, the
Robinson.
document in front of members is essentially the side-by-side. So the pairs on the side-by-side indicate, items that are paired in the side-by-side bill in front of you. I believe what the chair is proposing is that the original row number 68 and original row number 182 are proposed by the Senate chair for adoption as a pair of items. That the chair is proposing that these items be considered and adopted as a paired.
Thank you, Mr. Arneson. So the motion will be, just so when we come back, the reason I had you number your rows so carefully was so that after you've had a chance to discuss this proposal, you will know what the motion will look like. The motion will be adopting both of the items that we have, the statewide testing and the grants to prepare the Indian teachers. We're taking a Senate provision and a House provision. Yes, and so they're both number 2. Are you clear what ones we're looking at here?
Madam Chair, I just
Chair
mentioned I've had
Youakim.
enough coffee today. Would you also be taking, because there are two statewide testing provisions. The one, the Senate language addresses the earlier MCAs. On the left side of the column, the Article 2, Section 9 addresses the before and above level testing requirements on the MCAs to shorten it up. So are you saying your proposal would be to accept both of those and then also accept both of the ones on the other line number 2?
Yeah, so look at the furthest column on your sheet. It calls to adopt. And so we're proposing adopting the Senate language with the A57 amendment. That'd be the first half. And the second half of that would be proposing adopting the House language where you see grants to prepare Indian teachers. That's House Article 3, Section 49. Does that provide some clarity for you, Chair Youakim?
Yes, madam. Yes and no, Madam Chair. So
What else would you like to know, Chair Youakim?
because the Senate Section 5 does, okay, now I'm getting it. So you don't like shortening up the MCAs with above and below level questions?
We did not address that.
But you did with accepting the Senate language on that article instead of the House?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Any further discussion? All right, we have, the next one will be a little easier for you to understand, I believe. That is the third item that you have penciled in, and that is original row number 205, and it's Article 4 on page R1. So if you can make sure you have that language in front of you. This deals with the individualized education program, and Mr. Arneson.
Madam Chair, yes, on Article 4, beginning on page 1, which would be House, Section 2, and Senate, Section 1. What the Senate proposes is to adopt a combination of these provisions. And excuse me, I see that I made a typographical error on the offer sheet, so this should read Senate paragraph B only, not Senate paragraph A. So Senate paragraph B only, and House paragraph D only. So the effect of this would be, if members look on page R2, it would be to adopt the Senate provisions on page R2, and it would be a proposal to adopt on page R3 the House language in paragraph D only.
Is there any discussion, Mr. Chair?
I'm just wondering if Ms. Para can again walk the committee through the House provisions.
Mr. Chair and members, the House version of this section makes the following changes. In paragraph B, the language that is not on the Senate side on page R2 is where it says that an IEP team, after affirmative approval of the parent, can eliminate the benchmarks or short-term objectives unless the student takes alternative assessments. So that's in the House language, not on the Senate. The House language also, if you go to page R3, has the provision regarding a paraprofessional assigned to work with an individual student with a disability being given time to review the student's IEP or be briefed on the student's needs, as well as being given paid time to a minimum of 8 hours of paid orientation.
Ms. Perro, before you go on, I just want to be clear, we don't have budget targets yet. These things involve dollars, and you might recall when we talked about the offer before us, we can't adopt things since we don't have a joint target yet. So I want to reassure the House that that these things could not or would not show up in a different adoption, but today we're focusing on those things that do not have budget targets.
Madam Chair?
And so yes, Mr. Chair, and so the ones that we are not addressing are because they have the dollars attached. Mr. Chair.
Madam Chair, the provision that Ms. Para just described on page 160.32 through 161.2 has no fiscal cost to the state.
But that is not in our offer. And again, we picked things that both, so let me just kind of reset the table here. The adopted proposal before us has items that were addressed in both bodies, but in different ways. Mm-hmm. And so the adoption before us is looking at those pieces from each body and things that do not contain dollars. So not to say that we won't come back and go through some of these things, I'm sure we will, but today's offer does not include them because it does not, the articles we're mentioning now were not included at all in the Senate language. So again, we're looking at things that were included in both bodies.
So, Madam Chair, the fact that there is no fiscal cost is immaterial at this point.
There were two criteria. Mm-hmm. One is that they are, as you recall, as this is very consistent with what we have done before. You might even note that I did not even include Senate-only provisions because there was no corresponding House provision. We did not do that earlier, and we're maintaining the very same structure now, which is we are looking at those items that have appeared in both bodies. And there are other items that have appeared in both bodies that have dollars attached, but you don't see those today here either in our proposal because we don't have that joint budget target yet.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions? Okay, so let's see, Mr. Arneson,
Madam Chair, the next
one.
pair of items are both in Article 6, Facilities Article. The first item appears on page R2. This is the provision relating to the disposal of surplus school computers. And the Senate proposes, as the first half of this pair, to adopt Senate Section 4 on page R2. And the second member in the pair is on page R8 of the same article. And the Senate proposal is to adopt House Section 8 relating to service cooperatives and joint powers agreements.
Is there any discussion on those provisions? And Mr. Arneson, then the last one, members, is the last on your sheet.
Madam Chair, I'm sorry.
Yes,
I was
Mr.
in
Chair.
Conversations.
Yes.
What provision did we just discuss?
The provision that we just discussed was provision 4, and you have 2 lines. Original row number 256 was disposing of surplus computers, and 264 was the House language regarding the joint powers.
Would Ms. Snyder be able to come forward? I know the MDE has looked at the second provision. Would she be able to come forward and give us the department's perspective?
On the joint powers?
Correct.
Oh, absolutely. Ms. Snyder. And you'll note that the provision we're adopting is the House provision. Ms. Snyder, welcome to the committee. Introduce yourself for the record.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Caitlin Snyder with the Minnesota Department of Education. I know that there were some conversations that the department was having related to the potential Senate position on joint powers, and I would like to have Dr. Melcher speak to.
So, Ms. Snyder.
But
Madam Chair, you're recommending the House
Yes.
provision, not the Senate provision.
Correct?
Okay.
My bad.
Okay.
And my apologies.
Okay,
know,
you have been excused.
I appreciate the support for the House position.
We're glad you had him teed up.
My apologies.
So, yes.
Before we go down a rabbit hole
Yeah, I
on a
just
beautiful
wanted-
spring day.
I know, I just didn't want to, exactly. So, any further questions?
Okay.
So we listened intently to those concerns, and we have ceded to the House position on that. All right. And then, so this is the Senate proposal before us. I want to make sure that members have, that we have discussed the amendments that come with them. And I do not believe, we need to get to the
Last item.
A51 amendment.
Madam Chair.
And if you could speak to that.
Yep. Madam Chair, the last row on the item list here is, again, a provision that was in both the House and Senate relating to the creation of an early learning scholarship account in the Special Revenue Fund. And what the Senate is proposing here is to adopt House, on page R10 of Article 8, adopt House Section 10 as amended by the A51 amendment.
So I want to make sure members all have a chance to get to that. And this is following the advice of MMB. And that is with the A51 amendment. And if we need some discussion on that, I think, Ms. Hoffer, you can talk a little bit about our discussion with MMB and why we have the A51 amendment, which is taking a little bit of language out of each House and Senate proposal. Ms.
Thank
Hofer.
you, Madam Chair and committee members. Following some questions from the conference committee here about the differences between the House and the Senate provisions relating to the early learning scholarship account, we did discuss with MMB whether or not the language was necessary in either the House or the Senate provisions. So the language we were discussing specifically in the House was on line 237.28. Money in the account is available until spent. As members may be aware, the special revenue fund is a bit different from the general fund in that it's governed by different statutes. And so money that's deposited into the special revenue fund tends to be available until spent unless discussions are had with the agency about funds remaining unspent and the need to spend those down. MMB does have the authority to cancel any funds that are left unspent for a prolonged period of time if the agency is unable to spend those down. As a result, the House language, money in the account is available until spent, is unnecessary. And then on the Senate language, there was discussion about, let's see, it would be lines 122.31 through 123.2. Any funds remaining unspent at the close of the fiscal year 4 years after the initial transfer from the general fund canceled to the general fund. So there was just some discussion about this. Because most funds in the in the special revenue fund do have the ability to remain in perpetuity until they're spent down. This would be a choice for the Senate to make those funds cancel back to the general fund at a certain point. There was some discussion while the bill was still in the Senate Finance Committee about whether or not that better complied with the budget rules. And I believe that the Finance Chair felt that it was necessary to have those sort of guards on the funds because it was a very large appropriation. But given that it's in the special revenue fund, the cancellation language isn't necessary. And so as a result, the Senate recommended adopting the House language, which was section 10, with the amendment to delete money in the account is available until spent. And then on line 237.30, the A51 amendment would change available to appropriated, which is just a technical change that better conforms with how admin appropriations are usually described.
Thank you. Chair Pinto.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am supportive of the amendment, and I just want to thank the staff and just note their professionalism and hard work in both the Senate and the House. This is a small point, but I know it took a little bit of, I suspect anyway, it took a little bit of work in pulling it together, and I'm grateful to them. Thank you. And to you, Madam Chair.
Yes. Any further comments or questions? So the Senate will be in a recess for the House to consider this proposal. And Chair Davnie, how much time do you think you need?
Hopefully, certainly no more than 45 minutes, 30 maybe even.
All right. So we will adjourn until the call of the, we will recess until the call of the chair. And we believe we'll give everyone a little bit of grace here, and we'll say it'll probably be close to 3:30. Thank you.
Thank you very much.